Celilo was gone. But, and this road, whoop, pushed the wrong button. Did it again. Oh, let's try this. Okay, this road here, when Celilo was in, this place was, that road wasn't built until 1889, so it's just on there to, it's, tells you it's there, but the road that went to Celilo, took off from this road, kind of right over in here, and went over here, and it went right along underneath this bluff, right along here, and then down here, and over here, and then down. It goes down a hill right there that's about that steep. That's not an exaggeration. And goes down to what, it started out as Lower Landing. And then over here you've got, Upper Landing, and then Deschutes Village. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on it so you can see how the place all came to be. They built steamboats here at Deschutes Village. Well, the first thing they had there was a pole boat, and it was built in Dufur, of all places. I mean, not saying anything against Dufur, but I mean, you build it there and then had to figure out how to get it to the water. So it took them 14 days, and I believe 8 people, and 6 or 8 yoke of oxen, and there's 2 oxen in the yoke, so there's 16 oxen. Took them 14 days to get it from Dufur to right there, which is the mouth of the Deschutes River, and that's when they put it in the. You have a question?
Yes. Why didn't they just build it there?
Because they had Orlando Humison and his father-in-law, Jonathan Jackson, had a sawmill in the Dufur Valley. And so they just sawed the lumber and built the boat there. And this thing was, it was called the Mountaineer, and it was 17 feet wide, 70 feet long, and would haul 80 tons of freight. And it was powered by manpower. In fact, they used Indian labor. I don't know that it was exclusively, but they did. And they pulled the thing up the river. And then when they got into spots where the water was, was too shallow or whatever, they actually tied ropes onto the front of it and pulled it up the river. Had to be quite a job. But that took place in 1853. Well, then, this kind of gives you a layout of things. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Well, wait, before I do that, I better say that Humison, being Orlando Humison, who is the guy that actually built the community of Celilo, he went to work and built that because they started building steamboats at Deschutes Village, and they built they actually built 4 of them, but the first one was the Colonel Wright, and they built it in 1857, I believe, and they ran it up the river, toward Wallula Landing, and I thought, well, I wonder how they did that, because they never navigated through this part of the river. They went up through Hell's Gate, this part here. It looks smaller and it's narrow, but it's really, really deep. Over here, in the fall of the year, the river's only 18 inches deep before they put in the dam, of course. And 18 inches would be plenty if the boat didn't have anything in it, because that's what a steamboat would draw, was 18 inches of water, empty. But anyway, so when they launched the Colonel Wright, they launched it in April. So the water was pretty high from the spring runoff, so they just whistled right up there. When they came back, they came down through Hell's Gate. and then went up here. Well, give you an idea of distance, it's probably about 4 miles from here to here. So what they had to do is they were loading the boats here and then coming down here and turning and going up so they could get up there. Well, Humison being the forward staker that he was, he went over and he built this road that I was just talking to you about, and he built pretty much everything that was at Celilo, and actually Celilo and Lower Landing were exactly the same place. But anyway, then I think the last boat that was built at Deschutes Village was in 1862, and the first one built in Celilo, I think, was 1862. It might have been 63. But then he got involved in all that. Well, then they, I ought to go to the next slide. There, okay. This is General Land Office notes. This one was 1862, and that one was 1860. It does say 1960, but it isn't true. It's not 1860. But anyway, here is Celilo, and you can see the road here. But see, this road here is the original road that it says it's a Walla Walla, and it goes over to the mouth of the Deschutes, crosses the Deschutes, and goes right on up the river. Then they did, but this is not the road that's there now. The road that's there now goes basically right along here like this and comes out at the Deschutes. Goes past Moody, and also goes, well, there's a gallon house, that's right in here. And then this deal over here, this is the next township over, and I'll kind of cover this stuff because right here, Orlando Humison had a flour mill. And now there's some question about whether he ever finished it because he put it up for sale in 1862. And so he may have never finished it, we don't know. But the remains of it were there for years, and we've got a picture of it here somewhere. And then right here, that's where Milo Cushing that's the 5 Mile house. Milo Cushing had a hotel there, or overnight place. And then over here, if you've ever heard of Nathan Olney, that's where his store was, is right there. But this right here is Fairbanks, as we know it today, but Fairbanks wasn't there in 1860. But I think we pretty well covered that. This road here is, I don't know whether you can see any of it or not, but there's other people who have done a deal on that, and they might know whether it's easy to follow or not. I saw Ann.
When you're finished with this slide, can you go back to the first slide and show us how much of that land is now covered with water?
I got another, that was just a cover page. We'll come to that again,
Okay.
and it'll be a better picture. So,
Where was the Oregon Trail over there?
the Oregon Trail, this road right here. That road there. And then it came over and it went, I believe it went up Company Hollow, because there was no road on 15 Mile below Freebridge until they put in the railroad, the Great Southern Railroad. Isn't that right, Jerry?
That's right.
Yeah. I was thinking it was. But yeah, that's the Oregon Trail. And there was even, a guy told me how to get across it before the Deschutes River, is you got right here, and you kind of went at an angle out like this, and you got to a certain point, you turned so many degrees and went the other way, and that way you stayed on it where the water was shallow enough, you didn't have to take a swim. Anyway, okay, now if I can remember what I'm doing here. Okay, this gives you a better idea. This smiley guy here is Orlando Humison. And I and believe he was the first judge of Wasco County. And he's this guy this is Lower Landing, that's his operation there, and this over here is his operation. There's a picture of this is a picture of that, and this was his flour mill, and the name of that falls is Cushing Falls, and it's named after Milo Cushing that had this house there. In fact, Cushing used to have, he provided housing for indigent people, and he would go in once a month and collect his money from the county. Of course, this is Upper Landing here. I don't see anything else pertinent there right this minute. Okay, this gives us a little. Now, here are the two principal people with these were the two biggest stockholders in the Oregon Steam Navigation Company. And they're the people that, when it was put together, they bought out Hummerson's operation. And this is, he was the #1 stockholder. Coe was #2. This guy came from back east. And when he arrived in Portland, he went to work as a blacksmith. He was no silver spoon in his mouth at all. And then from Portland, he moved to the Dalles, and Thompson's Addition is named for this man. That's where he lived. And at that time, he was the Indian agent for the Umatilla Indian tribe. Why he was located in the Dalles with that title, I don't know. It seemed like to me it was an awful long ways away from the Umatilla Indians. And this guy, Lawrence Coe, he was actually a mayor of the Dalles for one term, but he came from Hood River. And he also had a younger brother that was also the captain deal was a riverboat captain. But he didn't hang around here too long. He left like a lot of them did and moved to San Francisco when they had their fortune made. But he died before the turn of the century, so he wasn't very old when he died. Thompson, on the other hand, he lived to be, I think he died in 1925, and he was worth $25 million. That wasn't too bad for back in those days. And not too bad for today. These are the boats that were made, these were built at Deschutesville, Deschutes Village, Upper Landing. And of course, there's the Mountaineer, the pole boats, and then they had bateaus. But, the Coon Wright was built in 59, the Okanagan in 61. The Tenino was actually rebuilt in 67 at Celilo, and then it was destroyed in 76. So they talk about, you'll see some stuff on the boats that were run down in the lower Columbia and on down to Astoria and whatnot. They talk about them lasting like 40 years. They didn't last that long in the upper river. 20 years was a good life for one of them because the river was hard on them. They banged into unforeseen reefs. In the spring of the year, they hit submerged logs, and of course they were all wood hull boats, so it really tore them up. And but this is a picture of a bateau with a Crate. Okay, anyway, what was his first name? That had Crate Point. Okay, he used these, and he fit, huh?
Edward.
Yes, I couldn't, I'd have thought of it a little bit, but that's not now. Anyway, he would ferry people down to the Willamette Valley, and then he'd bring the boat back and gather up another one and ferry him down there. Oh, yes, and the other one, this deal up here, is the mouth of the chutes, and this picture was given to me by Eldon Wagenglass. But if you look at a little spot, let's see, there's Miller right there, the community of Miller. Used to drive right by it. And then right there, oops, you can just see that little white spot there. That's the Miller School. It was a grade school. And I don't know how far back it went, but it wasn't there when Celilo was. It came into being. But I knew some people that went to school there. This picture was taken, no, it says 1910, but see, it's got a railroad bridge there. But you came to get, as the Oregon Trail came across, you started right over here, you came across, and then you came across here, but this is taken where all these pieces of land show up. But in higher water, you couldn't see them, so it told you to come across again, and then turn and go this way. And that got you across the river without taking a swim. Okay, and this is just deals, just, what do you call them, timetables are not timetables really, but advertisements telling you that you could catch such and such a boat at such and such a place, and you'd be there. And this thing here is just a deal out of the Oregonian, talking about, this would have been in the early years, Emerson, Drew and Company, they transported freight east from the Deschutes to go to Wallula Landing, and then from there it went to Walla Walla. And of course, their business really picked up in '61 when the gold mine started in the Clearwater country, and also that's when I think '61 or '62 is when they found gold at Granite out of Canyon City. I pushed the wrong button. Nothing. Okay, this is Oregon Steam Navigation's operations in the Dalles. You'll notice all this wood here and here and over there. This is the mouth right along here of Milford. And then in later years, they moved it over here and filled up all this area back in here. I suppose they filled it with sand, I don't know. But anyway, it's all filled in now. And here's 3 steamboats there, and one of them is a side wheeler, which could run just fine. In fact, I'm not sure, I did know the name of it, but it might have been the Oneida. And the Oneida was the only side wheeler built at Celilo, and it didn't work well. And so I think that's one of them that they waited till high water in the spring of the year and brought it over the falls. They did that with several boats. Some of them worked well, some of them was a disaster. There was a loss of life in some cases when they brought them over, but they didn't bring that many of them. But if they could bring them over in the spring of the year, the falls didn't melt so much. And another thing I might say, this right here is a railroad track, and they backed the train down there, unloaded the stern wheelers, and brought it up here, and this railroad track here, and this right here is a corner of the Umatilla house. And they could just, the train went by in the front, and the boats were behind it. And then from the Umatilla house, that was the station where everybody loaded onto the portage train to go to Celilo. And and this here, that there is their warehouse, their repair shop right there. And these buildings here are for the people that work there. But the boats that were on the upper river did not come down here for repairs because they couldn't take them back. They'd have to go over the falls with them, and there was no you could go one way but not the other. Okay, this is a little more better. Here's their shops right there. This is their agent's house, and this is a picture of the same thing, only it's agent's office, I should say. And, I don't know what these guys are doing, nothing in particular, I guess, just getting their picture taken. Okay, now we've got a better picture of Celilo. I talked a little more about it. It had to be a miserable place to work because all this here, it doesn't, might look a little bit like snow, and it isn't, it's sand. In fact, when they were trying to figure out the meaning of Celilo, somebody suggested it was a Klickitat Indian name meaning shifting sand. And they said, if that was the name of it, that was a good name, because they had shifting sand. And this here, this is the warehouse. There are 64 doors on that warehouse. At the time it was built, it was the longest floating dock in the western United States. And there'll be a picture of it come up here. But there really isn't anything behind this picture here. This is looking down the river, and you'll just see a little corner right there of the dry dock, where they built boats and repaired them. That had to be a rotten job too, because they picked up some of these boats, weighed hundreds of tons. They had a series of windlass, which is hand to crank winches, and that's how they got them things up all out of the water. Had to be a neat job. Anyway, there's in one of these houses, buildings, right here, this is a cook shack for there's got to be more to this town back over in here. We don't have a picture of it. But that right there is a dinner bell. And it's pretty easier to tell what was in the town, or what wasn't in the town, than it was what was. There is no cemetery, there are no schools, there are no hospitals. No schools, hospitals, something else that you would normally think. Oh, churches. There's no churches there, never was. I'll leave this place right here a little bit to your imagination. There's a saloon in the bottom. Yeah, and the upstairs is a hotel. And I thought, well, that's reasonable that you'd have a hotel there. No, it isn't reasonable to have a hotel there because there's no reason for it. When you came in on a boat, like this guy here, and this over here is a little steam engine that pulls the train. That's a locomotive that pulls the train. When you came in on the boat, you stayed on the boat until the train came out from the Dalles. Now, in the real early times, the telegraph only went from the Dalles to Celilo. Didn't go anywhere else, because the road didn't go any further either. There's the end of it right there. And I thought, they said, well, they would contact the Umatilla house when a boat was 2 hours out. It was between 2 hours before it got to Celilo. How did they know that? The telegraph didn't go any further than Celilo. They didn't catch it on a cell phone, I'm sure of that. But anyway, and I'll show you, we'll have a slide here, I'll show you. But by 1870, the telegraph went all the way through to Wallula. Excuse me. So then they could, he communicate and says, well, we're at Rufus and the boat just went by, or whatever, But, and let's see what else.
Those buildings were all occupied by the pale face. Those buildings there would have been occupied by the pale face.
Oh, yes. The Indians had no connection with this whatsoever. They might, I don't know, but they might have worked there since they worked on the pole boats. This This deal was, it would take them as much as a year to build one of those steamboats. So it was labor intense, there was nothing done by power, except manpower. So it took a lot of people. And in fact, I've heard it said that there was as many as 1,000 people lived here, but I don't know where they lived. And the census records do not support that idea. There was probably about a page and a half of census records for Celilo. In fact, when Celilo started in 1860, the census enumeration district was called Deschutes Bridge, which was basically the lower landing, upper landing. Deschutesville is what they call
This is
Deschutesville.
all above Celilo Falls?
Oh, yes.
This is all above, okay.
Yeah, it's all above Celilo Falls. This originally was called Upper Landing, and when Oregon Steam Navigation bought it, Lawrence Coe changed the name of it to Celilo. He's the guy that did it. He was, big in Oregon Steam. So, we may come back to this as I think of some. Oh, one thing I should say is, they could come in on the rail right here. Then the steam engine unhooked from the cars, usually 3 or 4 or 5 cars, and then they backed over here, and there's a turntable right here. And they turned the locomotive around, and then he went out right here, back onto the main line, backed up, hooked onto the train, and the back became the front. And then he backed it down to wherever he needed it along this line of the warehouse, to wherever the steamboat was. In this case, it's right there, it's obvious. And then they had a little portable office that ran inside that warehouse. And wherever the steamboat was, they just rolled that office along until they got to it. Then they could check freight going both directions, off the boat and on the boat going the other way. And like I said, while all that's going on, you got plenty of time to get off the steamboat and get on the train. And, yes?
I may be jumping ahead of you and you'll get to it, but if there were no schools, no churches, maybe there were basically no families and no...
You're correct. You are correct. There was no family. Though the fella that ran the mercantile store here, a fellow by the name of Mahoney, he had a wife and a 3-month-old baby. But that's the only person I found there that had any children.
Well, I'm even wondering, maybe they lived in the Dalles. Maybe the men, that there were boarding houses and then they would go home somewhere else.
And they might, but the truth of the matter is, I wouldn't be surprised what they work 7 days a week. I don't know. But there had to be a lot of people, because they had to repair boats, they built boats, they had to be stevedores, move the freight from the train to the steamboat, and from the steamboat to the train. There was a lot of stuff to do.
The same people that own the railroad also own the boats.
Oregon Steam Navigation owned it all.
Monopoly.
Yeah, well, yes, it was, really, but truthfully, it came at a time when it needed to have a monopoly. Yes.
What kind of freight was being moved?
Well, from here, it was primarily, well, of course, they moved supplies for both the Umatilla Indian Reservation, government contract. That's how come they got into this thing, is they had a government contract to supply beef and supplies whatnot for the fort at Walla Walla. But also, they were taking beef up for the Indians on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And the government was paying them pretty good for that. And that's why they started out they decided, well, we'll try a steamboat and see how that'll work, until they built one and it worked, and that's started. But that deal was, that program was R.R. Thompson's. He got into that deal. And, but by the time they got here, they also had to move a lot of materials for miners, both at Canyon City and also at up on the Clearwater River in Idaho. And that's, and then also they moved the people to go along with them, you know. But and then there was merchants up there. You had to have food and utensils and all that sort of thing. Mining, better than mining equipment might be. But that's primarily what they moved. And then when they came down, brought gold. There was one of the early boats here, and it made one trip and made $18,000. That was a lot of money. But another thing about, I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit. Oh, wrong button. When Oregon Steam Navigation bought this from Orlando Humison, they paid him $80,000 for his right away from the railroad track, which wasn't built yet, and for the road that went from Fairbanks over down to down here. They paid him for that too. $80,000 and I believe 15 shares of Oregon Steam Navigation stock. And you think, well, that doesn't amount to much. The stock cost $5,000 a share. So it was, I'd take it if they give it. But anyway, by doing that, the line of thinking was if they did it that way, then Humison, who was quite a mover and shaker, he wouldn't go into business in competition with him because he'd be in competition with himself because he owned part of Oregon Steam. Anyway, we can come back to that if we need to. Here is the warehouse. This thing is 906 feet long, and there's kind of 3 sections to it. There's 3 guys doing their best work. And right there, you'll see a little that's a hand truck right there. That's how all that stuff had to be moved. And then this deal I'm talking about, you can't see it. It might be behind the camera is, I don't know. But they had this little office on a trolley, and it just ran back and forth to wherever they needed it inside the warehouse. I don't know what that is. I have no idea. If anybody has a clue, and here's an outside view of it, kind of wanders down into the river. In fact, in that picture there, if you look at it real close, the bottom end of it, of the warehouse, is in the water. But I suppose if the water dropped down far enough, it would be out, out of the water. But anyway, that was the biggest one on the West Coast at the time. Oh, now I did something wrong. There, oh, Christ. Now where am I at? Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, no. Sandy, what'd I do? Where'd Sandy go? Uh-oh. Oh, we got it now. We're all right. Okay, I'm going to go forward to see if I push the right button. Aha. This is the dry dock. Looks kind of tacky, but I don't know. I suppose this might have been later. Well, no, this picture was taken in 1867, so that would have been about 6 years into the program. This is a list of all the boats and the years they were built. It doesn't say anything about how the new Tenino was rebuilt at Celilo in '76, and it was built in 61, and it was built at the Chutes, but it was rebuilt in '76, and they called it New Tenino. One thing that's hard to keep track of these things is you take them in and rebuild them about every 6 or 7 years, and sometimes they'll change the name of them, sometimes they won't, and I mean, it can be, you have to have a book that tells you what they did with all of them, and then it also will tell you what happened to them. And some of them burned, some of them were wrecked, some of them exploded, like where's the Annie Faxon? It's here somewhere. Oh, there it is, right there. She was built in '77 and let's see. Yeah, she was rebuilt in '77, but she wasn't originally the Annie Faxon. But then after she was rebuilt, she blew her boilers in, somewhere up in Washington, up on the Snake, or on the Snake, up on the Snake River. Her boilers blew up, and that was the end of her. They didn't rebuild her. In fact, the worst, I might just put this in just for whatever it's worth. The worst accident they ever had with a steamboat was at Kanema, which is part of Oregon City now. And they had a boat. I don't know what the deal was. They never did figure out, because they never did talk to the fireman or the engineer. But they have a pressure relief valve in the boiler, and somebody had tied the pressure relief down. And the last they saw of the engineer or the fireman, he was headed off over the hill. But it blew up, and there was another boat tied alongside of it, and some of the shrapnel from the boat that blew up hit the pilot was in the pilot house, and it hit him in the side of the head and killed him. But they had bodies floating around in the Willamette River. They're out there trying to gather them up. But that was the worst. I can't remember what the loss of life was, but they were just getting ready to take off on it, so the boat was loaded.
Any idea why there's a 12-year gap in the middle? What was going on? Why they weren't rebuilding or building new?
Between 64 and 76?
Yeah.
My guess would be they were rebuilding boats, and they probably had what they needed. They were running, so they weren't building them. And another thing too, is they also, especially in later years, they built them in Rufus and at Umatilla, and then a lot of them were built farther up the river because they used them on up to Columbia, clear to Canada. In fact, there's one of these boats, not this one here, but it took me a while to figure out where it was built in Little Dalles, Washington. And I thought, well, it must be Dallas Fort. No, Little Dalles, Washington is clear up by the Canadian border. But it's right on Columbia. But anyway, they built a boat there, but I think there was only one that was built there. And then they got to where they could shuffle them around. There's boats that ran here, like Norma was a boat that ran, when they were building the railroads up to the chutes, it ran right along over here. And they actually carried locomotives and cars, trains in other words, from Wishram over here and hooked it up so that they could go up the west side. The dam, it was before 1912, because the bridge at the Celilo wasn't built yet. And what I started to say was the Norma was actually built in right up in the Boise area in Idaho, and they brought it through Hell's Canyon. They claimed that at times they hit speeds of 60 miles an hour. That should have been quite a thrill. Yes, sir.
John, where did all the wood come from for the dock and the warehouse and?
I'm gonna guess. See, you're talking about Orlando Humison. So his father-in-law owned that sawmill at Dufur, and I'm gonna say that it came from Dufur, and that's why they went right on using the road that went from Fairbanks to Celilo, was because Carlton Watkins took a picture of the Dalles in 1867, and there wasn't any trees.
Did they float any of the lumber down to the chutes and retrieve it, use it as a big flume?
No, because they didn't have any way to get it there. I would say they probably brought it by wagon, and when they got to the top of the hill above Celilo, there's a road goes up a draw and then turns and goes up the side of the hill. That isn't the way they went in to Celilo. They went over like that, and it's just about as steep as a cow's face, going right down right down. And of course, the railroad wasn't in there then like it is now, so they could just scoot right on down to the bottom of the hill.
And the other wood, where did they get the wood to refuel the steamers, or did they refuel them there at all?
No, they didn't refuel them there. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something I forgot. They refueled them at Columbus, or is it Columbus or Columbia, Washington. And the wood came from north of Goldendale. And they brought it down there, and when a boat left Celilo, it went just a little ways up the river till it got to Columbus, stopped, loaded up with wood, and went on. But there just wasn't any wood here. And the wood that was in the Dalles, it was brought up river with wood scouts. That's what they called them. And some of them had sails on them, you know, they sail up the river.
And the railroad, the portage road, was it heavy duty enough to have brought timber from west of the Dalles up?
But they had no way to cut it. That's the thing of it. That's why they didn't bring it up that way. For one thing, they would have had to went clear down the river somewhere to get it.
Well, like over Wicked Hat, or Lyle.
Oh, but they had a good source of firewood coming out of there, and there was no reason why you gotta keep in mind you have to keep in mind the politics. And the politics is that at the time this thing here was going on, Orlando Humison was involved, and his father-in-law and him had that sawmill out there, so they were gonna miss an opportunity to bring some wood in here, and that's where it came from. He wasn't gonna buy it off somewhere else when he already had it. And not only that, but they could saw it. And it wasn't mill lumber, it was just rough cut lumber, and the buildings were all board and batten, just sitting on the ground. So when they were through with Celilo, they just packed their bag and left, and the building just fell down. Okay, that's the Yakima, the steamer, the Yakima, right there. And it was one of the boats that was built at, that's Celilo. Now, let me see if I can spell something up again. No, okay, this is the Annie Faxon that I just talked about a minute ago. And the Annie Faxon was built at Celilo, and it's the one that, the Brewer boilers up in Washington. And that, but she lived for 20 years, and that wasn't, I mean, that's good for the upper river. You'll notice me calling them she. These boats were all referred to in the female gender. They said as soon as they were built, they took on human characteristics until they developed their own personality. And then they were all different. They handled different and everything like that. They built one, and I'm not sure where it was built. They said she had the lousiest attitude. I mean, she had a bad attitude. If there was a reef, she'd find it. Nobody else had ever seen it. She could find it. One time they were on her, and the engine squeaked. Never figured out why. Been around, couldn't find anything wrong with it. Got it going again, and on up the river they went. And then it always had a hole in the hull because she was banging into something. And finally they said they'd had enough of that, so they took it back in, changed the name of it. At one time I knew what the name of it was. They changed the name of it, completely redid it, and sent it back out. And they said she spent the rest of her life flying her trade, running up and down the river, and never caused any problem for anybody. It was just something she'd starting out with she just didn't like. But the Annie Faxon ran quite a little bit in the upper river. I think in this, well, she had Celilo there, but she went clear off up into the Snake River and up to Lewiston. Okay, now here's a couple of pictures in a way that are here to show what Carlton Watkins was capable of doing. That right there is Cape Horn. This is Cape Horn here. This is the west end, and this is the east end. This deal is all still there as it was, But the, this here is all filled in. And we didn't fill that and took that trestle out. And I never did know the name of that boat, that train. That's the J.C. Ainsworth. That's the name of the locomotive. This picture here is considered by many critics to be the finest picture of the 19th century, taken in the 19th century. Because of its use of natural light and everything, not bragging about the railroad or anything like that. It's not that. It's just the composition of the picture. Critics, of course, Carlton Watkins was from the San Francisco Bay Area, and they considered that to be the finest picture of the 19th century. But, pushed the wrong button again. One I didn't use. Okay, here's a little bit better picture of that. And don't worry about the guys falling off of those cars, because the train was stopped. And this one here, we didn't have, I don't think we had that one on the portage run, but this one, of course, we did. What these pictures were taken for, I only found a short time ago that Carlton Watkins was under the employ, not directly, but I guess he was contracted, with Oregon Steam Navigation to take these pictures. He didn't take any further east than Celilo. But Oregon Steam Navigation, this could not be a scripted railroad. Oregon Steam was trying to get the federal government to pay for the railroad to go down the gorge, the full length of it. And they had been planning on this for a long time. But you see, the other railroads around, as well as the Dallas Military Road, that kind of stuff, people were paid to build these things by giving them so much property. Somebody would know, every other section? Yeah, okay, it was given to the railroad. Well, no offense intended, but what would they do with this pile of rocks here? Who would they give it, who would they sell it to? So that nobody wanted it. So the railroad wasn't very interested in building railroad unless the federal government would pay for it. And so they were trying to impress upon the government how much they had done, what they had, and what they had so far. And that's why he was up here and these guys were standing on this train. They were trying to, somebody said once, well, they were using it for advertising. Well, they might have used it for advertising, but the main thing was to just try to impress the federal government to come up with some money, and they didn't. To my knowledge, anyway, they somewhere in there they might have, I don't know. Not navigation outfit didn't gain anything. Okay, now the Oregon Steam Navigation had their own telegraph between the Umatilla House in the Dalles and Celilo. Didn't go any further, but this thing here is, it says Oregon Steam Navigation Company's telegraph. This right here, right there, it says 1870. So sometime between 1860 and 1870, they completed, and there's little arrows right here. That's pointing at the telegraph poles. Indicate that it's there. But they put that telegraph line through so that they could effectively tell somebody when a boat was coming. And then this is this over here is from excerpt out of the Oregonian, and like it's basically what it's saying is with all the activity they got up there, it's no wonder somebody's making some money. Okay, we're close to the end of this. These three people, here's the three names for the hotel, right there. Its real name was the White Cloud Hotel, and that's what Humison gave it. But it was also known as the Celilo Hotel, And it was also known as the Erskine Hotel after these two people here. It's a man and wife. And they ran the hotel for most of its life. Though he is listed as the proprietor, I don't think he ever had much of anything to do with it. His wife ran it. And the Wasco County historian Lulu Crandall used to live over on 15 Mile when she was a little girl. And she and a friend of hers used to get on their saddle horses and they'd ride over to Celilo, just over there just for someplace to ride. And on one of her recitation, isn't it? That's the right word. She mentioned the deal about all the sand, but she also mentioned, she said, there's also a hotel there for the entertainment of the men that work there. Now, I'm not going to go any further than that. You can figure out but there was no other reason for the hotel to be there. None. But you could stay there, I guess, if you wanted to, but that wasn't the purpose of it. Another money maker. Anyway, all three of these people were Irish immigrants. This guy came first, and he fought in the Mexican War. He was with the military group that marched into Mexico City in 1848. He came here, I think, about 1848, 47, 48. And then he came west and north and fought in the Yakima Indian Wars out of Fort Walla Walla. This lady here is later his wife. She came to the United States as an indentured passenger. In other words, when she got here, they basically sold her into slavery for 5 years. Well, she evidently didn't have too bad of a time because she was a nanny for a military captain's family, man and his wife, and they had 2 little kids. So she ended up in Fort Walla Walla because that's where he was stationed. Well, then her servitude was up in 1858. So she was brought down from Fort Walla Walla to Fort Dallas, and I might say dumped in the Dalles. And at the same time, this guy here, he'd put in 10 years in the military, so he came to the Dalles and was mustered out in the Dalles. And the captain that she worked for, him and his wife, this was 1858, well, things were starting to heat up back east with the Civil War coming up. The guy's name was Thomas Johnson. There's nothing to indicate that she ever communicated with those people again. But they left her here. She didn't have any relatives here. Now, she came to the United States by herself when she was 18 years old. And, but anyway, after living in the Dalles, she had to have known him when she was in Walla Walla. They married, and they lived in the Dalles for a while, and he was a saloon keeper. I don't think she worked at all, but maybe she did. Anyway, then they moved out here and ran the hotel. And he also was a member of the Jackson Engine Company and also the Diligent Hook and Ladder Company in the Dalles. So that when he died in 1862, there was a brass band that played at his funeral, but we don't know where he buried him. Anyway, he was also an engineer and a fireman on the Portage Railroad part of the time. Then enter this guy here. This is his homestead here. It's above Celilo. Here's Celilo right there. And his homestead was right there, and his house was right there. And Erskine's had a house right here. This was a timber culture, and this was a homestead. And so George dies in 1882. I have no idea what he died from. And then, and it says he lived until 85, he did. 85 is when Billy, Shelley, married George's widow. And she was 13, 14 years older than he was, maybe 15. A lot older. Anyway, his house was right, you can just see the foundation of it right there. That's all there is left of it. And then right over in here was where, and these people had a pretty nice home. But see, George could hop out the door and just walk down the road to Celilo and go to work. Same thing with Mary. That's where they met. But then after George died, 3 years later, she married Billy. Well, instead of living in this deal is about 6 feet wide and about 10 or 12 feet long. So they moved over to her house, and they lived there until 1906. And, of course, Celilo was gone by 1882. So what did they do until 1906? Well, you see this jug here? This guy here was a saloon keeper. Right back, right kind of up here, up above where that tree is there, was a gallon house. And if you don't know what a gallon house is, that was a place where you could buy a gallon of whiskey, but nothing less. They were not supposed to sell it on the premises, to be consumed on the premises. People got caught at it, and the fine was $25. I don't know that he got caught at it. Anyway, they put he didn't really have enough, this land is the soil is quite shallow. Doesn't really grow much anything, but you can see where, if you're there, you can see where it's been cultivated sometime or other long ago. So, anyway, he was making his living selling booze out of this gallon house, which was right alongside of the Moody Road that's still there. Well, in 1906, it was looking like they were going to have prohibition. So he sized up the situation and thought, it's time for us to leave. So he sold his place here to the Petroff family, and they still own it. Well, he sold it to Mace Fulton, then Mace Fulton sold it to the Petroff family in the 1920s. This piece of property here belonged to her, and that was sold to Carlyle's, and they still own it today. Now, let's see, I think,
All these buildings are between the Chutes River and Celilo Falls. All these things we've been looking at.
yes. In fact, they're all, that would be the falls right there. And it looks like it's only just a little ways, but it's actually about 1.5 miles over to Celilo, the community. And all those buildings are right there. And it's about 2 miles from the falls. Maybe, I don't remember now whether we've got, we should have another picture there somewhere, but maybe it's not there. Now, oh Christ, I pushed the wrong button again. You'd think that this long, I'd kind of have a clue as to what button to push.
There are only 2 choices.
Yeah, right. Okay, this is a census record, and that's all the people that lived at Celilo, I believe in 1870. That's how many you had. And some of these people were farmers that were in the same enumeration district. Now you talk about having political horsepower. In 1860, the enumeration district was at the mouth of the Chutes, at what they call the Chutes Bridge. In 1870, Oregon Steam Navigation got it changed to Celilo. And then when Celilo ceased to exist, it became Columbia District, which is over along 50 Mile Creek. That's another thing that's kind of interesting. I need to go back. Yeah. Well, I want to go back there a ways.
Before 1850, this is all Indian land now.
No. In fact, even now, some of it still belongs to the state. The Indians, well, I had a picture, but it didn't end up on here. There's two cemeteries right alongside the road that goes down into Celilo. Why the cemeteries are separate, I have no idea. But they are fenced and they are separate. You can see the bottom one from the top, but you can't see the top one from the bottom. But they are strictly Indian cemeteries. That's another thing, there's no burial for white people here. I mean, if they died, they had to cart them off somewhere and bury them. But, I'm gonna go back here a little. Probably.
Back in the day, Lewis Park was
Huh?
Indian land.
Pardon?
When Lewis Park went by, it was all Indian land back then.
Well, it was in controversy as to who it even belonged to then. Whether it belonged to the United, whether it belonged to the United States or Great Britain.
Ron, we have a question.
Oh,
Oh, please, discuss what was the end of Salada in the 1880s? What was the factor?
certainly. It disappeared in 1882 because that's when they put the Union Pacific Railroad, or it was Oregon Rail and Navigation, put a rail all the way through and it went, they didn't have any, and they quit making steamboats there. They didn't run any steamboats down from, below Umatilla. So any boats that were built, they did build a few more boats at Celilo, but they were built after the turn of the century. And I can explain to you why. After they got the trains in, it was so much easier because they didn't have to move wheat. And that was a big commodity they were moving after all the gold mining was over. So, but they had to move it off the boat, onto the train, get to the Dalles, move it off the train and onto another boat. They didn't have to do that anymore at the Cascades, down at Cascade Locks, because they had yeah, they had the locks. Yeah, I drew a blank. Okay, it comes and goes.